Hello and welcome back to Proverbs, a letter to my son. Today we're going to look at lesson 15 in the series, and we'll be using the King James translation for this lesson. Today we're going to look at Proverbs 30, and we'll see where a father rebukes his two older sons. Before we get deep into the lesson, I want to share something with you. I've never heard anyone teach this lesson like I'm going to do it. I believe that this chapter goes together as a unit. And to take one paragraph or verse out of the chapter is to lose not only the context, but the proper application. Let me illustrate. We'll look at two different paragraphs in Proverbs chapter 30. We're going to read them, and you tell me what application you can make to them. Let's read it. There be three things which are too wonderful for me, yea, four which I know not. The way of an eagle in the air, the way of a serpent upon a rock, the way of a ship in the midst of the sea, and the way of a man with a maid. Such is the way of an adulterous woman. She eateth, wipeth her mouth, and saith, I have done no wickedness. Now, this is a whole paragraph. All of it goes together. I ask you, what application can you make to that paragraph? Now, if you're like almost everyone I have asked, you're going to say, zero with a ring rubbed out, none. And you'd be right. And the issue is that you don't take the application from that paragraph, because that paragraph is an illustration of a verse earlier in the chapter, and I'll show you that as we go. Let's look at one more paragraph, verses 29 through 31. There be three things which go well, yea, four are comely in going. A lion which is strongest among beasts, and turneth not away for any. A greyhound, a he-goat also, and a king against whom there is no rising. I don't mean to be facetious, but doesn't that bless your heart? Again, if it's a standalone paragraph, we would be hard-pressed to make any usable application out of that paragraph. But that's not the case. As you're going to see as we go, this chapter goes together as a unit. And you'll see as we go. You'll love the chart and the logic, deep, deep logic. I love this chapter. Before we proceed, please stop, download, and print Proverbs 30 KJV. And you'll find it at my website, jlsparaphrase.org. Download this file and print it, and please have it in front of you as we proceed. The logic of this chapter is very deep. It's simple, but it's very deep. And without that handout, there's a good chance that you get lost somewhere in the discussion. So have that in front of you, and assuming you've done that and that you have it in your lap or on your desk, let's proceed. So now, Proverbs chapter 30, a man named Augur is rebuking his two sons. So who are the actors in the chapter? Well, the actors are Augur, the son of Jacob. He's the father, and I'll show you when we get all done why I believe he is the actual father of Ithiel and Ucal. But it says the words of Augur, the son of Jacob, even the prophecy. Well, what kind of prophecy? Look at it, it's highlighted in blue. Well, basically, Augur is sharing a deep burden with his sons for their welfare. If you'll notice in chapter 31, when Lemuel's mother tries to teach her son, it also says that there's a deep burden. Both of them are deeply concerned about the welfare of their children. So he's the father. Now, what about the sons? Well, Ithiel is named first, so I assume that he is the older brother, well entrenched in his rebellion. You'll see it as we go. Proud, arrogant man. And then it mentions Ucal, and I assume he's the younger brother because he's mentioned second. One of two things is true regarding Ucal. He's either being severely adversely affected by his older rebellious brother, or he is equally as entrenched in his rebellion. Otherwise, I see no need for Augur to include both boys in the rebuke. So these are the ones. And as you go through, you'll see it's a complete rebuke from beginning to end. Now, the sheets you downloaded and printed and holding in your hand, this is the structure of that chart. You have 12 blocks in the upper section and then 2 blocks below. As we go through, you'll see the column on the left is the surface indicators, or the things that Augur saw these boys doing, these undesirable things. He approached them himself about those. And then the next column is the root cause, the hard attitudes that drove those undesirable attitudes and actions. And then the third column These are things they need to see in order to recognize the disastrous end of their actions and see the need to correct it. And then, of course, in the bottom, it's the conclusion where he calls for them to repent. Before we proceed through the chart, I want you to understand, look in your paper, the whole of row 1 deals with disrespect for parental authority. All of row 2 deals with a distorted view of sin. All of row 3 deals with an extreme pride and arrogance on the part of these boys. And row 4 deals with a critical and destructive spirit. So that's the structure of this chart now. Before we actually get into start the discussion, I want to jump right to verse 13. And you might say, well, why do that? Well, let's read it. There's a generation or a kind of man, oh, how lofty are his eyes, and his eyelids are raised up, or raised in arrogance. These boys were proud and arrogant. They reeked with pride and arrogance. And this pride is what drove all the rest of the undesirable attitudes and actions we're going to see about these boys. So that's why I say it's the key verse for the chapter, because it gives us direction as to where we're going to go. So now we just looked at verse 13. We're going to jump now to the first column on the left and look at the surface indicators. We'll look at one block at a time. Let's look at verses 1 to 4. And I entitled it Augur's Confession. Now you might say, what are you talking about? Well, let me show you. We'll jump right into the text. Augur says, surely I am more brutish or stupid than any man. I do not have the understanding of a man. Wait a minute. The dad is saying this to his sons? Yeah, he's saying, guys, I am so stupid, nobody should be as stupid as me. Man, how do you put up with me? That's in the physical realm. He doesn't know anything about living. And then in the spiritual realm, he says, I neither learn wisdom nor have a knowledge of the holy. I don't know the first thing about God. I'm an absolute imbecile. How in the world do you guys put up with me? Now, you might say, well, why is Augur being so sarcastic? Well, he's giving the boys back some of the treatment that they are giving him. But in essence, he's setting them up for what I call a sucker trick. Because Augur is getting ready to ask these boys 4 questions that he knows they can answer. But then he'll ask them a question he knows they cannot answer. Let's look at those questions. Who hath ascended up to heaven or descended? And I'm sure he could see these boys saying, yeah, Jehovah, I know that. Well, they've been through their bar mitzvah, and he knew they knew that. And they're gleaming with pride. Sure, I know it. Well, who hath gathered the winds in his fist? Jehovah. Who's bound the waters in a garment? Jehovah. Who's established all the ends of the earth? What's his name? And they're proudly saying, Jehovah, of course. Everybody knows that. And then he asked the question, and what's his son's name? Well, nobody in his day knew the name of the Son of God. It hadn't been revealed yet. And Augur is saying, okay, guys, you're so smart, and Dad's so stupid. What's his name? Guys, surely you know. You do know, don't you? Well, wait a minute. Maybe old Dad's not as stupid as you think. And maybe you're not as smart as you think. Wake up and recognize where you're going and the hurts and the losses you're generating by being disrespectful to your parents. So let's put that in the chart now, and you'll see it on the upper left block of your chart. He says, I'm absolutely stupid, and surely you know everything. So this is Augur's approach to the boys. Because remember, disrespect for parents on the row 1, and you'll see as we go across how all 3 of those blocks in that row tie together. So let's go to the next one now. We're looking verses 5 and 6, the second block down. You'll see it on the screen there. We're going to go to verses 5 and 6. And it says, the text says, add thou not unto his words, lest he reprove thee, and thou be found a liar. You say, well, what? Well, apparently these boys were feeling like they were God's spokesman. As you'll see in a little bit, they didn't see themselves as sinners. So they talked as though they were God's spokesman when God hadn't told them anything. And Augur's saying, be careful, it's going to come back and bite you. You guys think you're so good? You think you're so deserving? In the end, you're going to be shown for the liar that you are. Be careful. Now, understand, he's approaching them about things he's seeing them doing. In our next column, we're going to see the hard attitude that drives this kind of adverse action and attitude. So let's stuff that in the chart now, and that's your second block down on the left column. Add not to his words, or you'll be found a liar. Now let's go to verses 7 and 9. That's the third block on the left column. And here's the text. 2 things I've required of thee, deny me them not before I die. Remove far from me vanity and lies, give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me, lest I be full and deny thee and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and take the name of my God in vain. Now, if you're like me, you look at the text in black and white, and it takes a while to figure out what in the world they're saying. As you've seen in earlier lessons, I've shifted the text left and right to form a word picture, and we're going to look at that now. This is what it looks like in picture form, and the text teaches itself. If you read from left to right, top to bottom, it reads exactly like the text. Let's read it. Remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me. But what it does is help us understand what the text is saying. If you'll notice in the blue, the white words, the vanity is the riches that give me so much that I don't need God. By the way, it appears that Augur here is praying to the Lord in front of these boys when he says this. Give me neither vanity nor riches. Why? Because I'll have so much, I don't need God. I don't need him. I have everything I need. So Augur says, don't put me there. And then on the right, the lies or the poverty that make me so much in need that I won't trust the Lord to provide for me, and I'll go out and steal and then blame God. But Augur says in the gray, feed me with food convenient for me, or better said, feed me with food that's my portion. In other words, give me just enough. Don't give me too much. Don't give me too little, but just give me just enough, and I'll be satisfied with that. And you say, well, where's he going with this? Well, remember in verse 13, we talked about how these boys are proud and arrogant. They expected the best. They expected the most. They expected people to look up to them. And Augur's saying, you guys are expecting the most. Wake up. You don't deserve it. You'll see how this goes together as we tie it all together. So let's put that in the chart, and that's on the third block of the left column. So now let's go to verse 10, and it says, accuse not a servant unto his master, lest he curse thee, and thou be found guilty. Now remember, row 4 deals with a critical and destructive spirit. And these boys were trying to get rid of these folks that they thought didn't deserve to live. And they're out accusing people of things they didn't do. And if they make the accusation and it goes to court and they find out that it wasn't true, then the judge says, you're the guilty one. Then the one accused curses the accuser to his face. So let's put it in the chart now. Don't unjustly criticize your coworker. Now, these are all surface indicators. Now we move to the hard attitudes that drive these attitudes and actions. I didn't see this logic in black and white, but it took me 14 years to get this all together. But man, it was beautiful when I saw it. So let's look at verse 11. There's a generation or a kind of man that curses their father and doth not bless their mother. This is the kind of person now, the hard attitude. What do? They curse dad to their face, sarcastically. So why was Augur being so sarcastic? Well, they're doing that to him. He just gave them some of their own medicine. And then it says that they don't bless their mother. They may not curse mother, but they can't say anything nice to them. And Augur's saying, this is the hard attitude that drives a person who has disrespect for parents. Now let's put this in the chart, and you can see verse 11, how it goes together on the paper you're holding. You see how it goes together with the one on the left. Both deal with parental disrespect. Now we go to verse 12, and it says there's a generation or a kind of man that are pure in their own eyes and yet is not washed from their filthiness. What's it saying? These guys don't see themselves as sinners. They're too good for that. Now, I don't know whether they just don't see their sin or if they feel they're so good they don't sin. But for whatever reason, they can't see their sin. And yet, as we look in the chart, and we tie that to the paragraph next to it, in column 1, you see how they thought they were so good they were going to lead other people in spiritual worship. Oh, boy, how arrogant can you get? Now we deal with verse 13. Remember, it's the key verse for the chapter. We looked at it. There's a generation or kind of man who, oh, how lofty are their eyes, and their eyelids are raised up in arrogance. So these boys are proud, arrogant, and that heart attitude is what drives it. So when we look at that's the key verse for the chapter. But when we look at the chart, you see how that goes together with them wanting and expecting more than anybody else, and Agur saying, wake up, you don't deserve it. Now we jump to verse 14. Again, we're dealing with heart attitudes. So there's a generation or a kind of man whose teeth are as swords and their jaw teeth as knives, to devour the poor from off the earth and the needy from among men. Notice in the text, notice in the red, the teeth are like the teeth in your mouth, the incisors. You chew up a piece of steak and then you swallow it. You chew it up and spit it out or whatever. But now the jaw teeth, in the red there, they're like the fangs, those fangs that stick up on a wild hog and just rip and tear everything. And that kind of hard attitude is destructive and critical. And these boys were trying to do away with people that they thought didn't deserve to live. So when we look at the chart now, you see how that goes together with their critical spirit slandering a slave to his master. Pretty, beautiful. When I first studied this, I got part of the logic down. And I just couldn't figure out the rest. And missionary Matt Hanna came to the house one day, and I was showing him what I'd learned. He said, oh yeah, I see how this goes. I mean, just off the top of his head. But I'm glad he saw it so that I could see it too. Beautiful logic. Now let's go to what they need to see in order to correct their undesirable attitudes and actions. So we're going to go to that first block on the upper right, verses 15 to 17, and now we'll read it. The horse leech has 2 daughters. What's a horse leech? What's a leech? It's like a fat worm. I understand that doctors in centuries past put them on the sore and they would clean out the putrefied sore. But they're parasites. They don't give anything. They just take and take and take. So our text says the horse leech has 2 daughters crying, give, give. You say, well, what's that have to do with these boys? Well, they're living at home, mooching off mom and dad. And they're saying, take care of me, provide for me. At the same time, they're still running their parents down. So the text says there are 3 things that are never satisfied, yea, 4 things, say not, it is enough. So we got a 3 and a 4 thing here. So notice I've highlighted 3 things in blue. What's the first thing that is never satisfied? Well, the grave. The grave will take as many people as will die until time ends. It'll just keep going on. And a barren womb. Unfortunately, there will always be some women who cannot bear a child. And it's unfortunate, but it'll be the case until time ends. And then earth that's not filled with water. Even the great flood, the water receded back or evaporated into the air, and all of it was taken out of the way. But it says it's never satisfied. It'll take all the water you give it. But now we jump to 4. Look at in the blue, it says 4 things, say not enough. The fire, I submit to you, that is different than the others. In order for a fire to continue to burn, it must have oxygen and combustible material. Once one of those 2 things goes away, it cries, I want more, I want more. But the fire goes out because there's no more fuel or oxygen. And you see, well, what's that have to do with the boys? Well, look at your screen there. In verse 17, it says, the eye that mocketh at his father and despiseth to obey his mother, the ravens of the valley shall pluck it out, and the young eagles shall eat it. So what's he saying here? Now realize, we're dealing with row 1 now. We're in that upper right block. He's saying, guys, if you keep going like you're going, you're going to come to a quick and disastrous end. It's guaranteed. Recognize the fact that you're heading for disaster and get that straightened out. Recognize it. But you see how that goes together with the middle block, the upper block in that middle column, and then we tie it together for the whole row. And you see how all three of those deal with parental disrespect. Pretty, isn't it? Now we go down to verse 18 to 20. We looked at this earlier at the beginning of the discussion. There be three things which are too wonderful for me, yea, four which I know not. So he's saying there are three things which absolutely fascinate me. And then there's a fourth that I just absolutely don't understand. So let's look. The three things now. The way of an eagle in the air. Augur knew nothing about aerodynamics, but he sure did enjoy watching those eagles glide through the air with such grace. And then the way of a serpent upon a rock. You got this serpent laying out there on a hot rock, just so gentle and peaceful, but stick your hand up there, and now in an instant it becomes a killing machine. And then a way of a ship in the midst of the sea. You got this ship out there with those large waves and that strong wind, and that little rudder steers that ship somehow through that safely to the other side. And Augur's saying, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. But then he says, there's a fourth that I just don't understand. And that is the way of a man with a maid. And I'm being facetious here. But you notice how a guy will do things he'd never do in his right mind when he falls in love with a gal. You know what I'm saying. But he'll do things that he wouldn't normally do because he loves this gal and he's going to make her his own. And Augur says, it's fascinating the way a guy changes like that. But there's something else equally as fascinating to me, and I don't understand it. Look at verse 20. This is a whole paragraph now. Such is the way of an adulterous woman. She eateth and wipeth her mouth and said, I have done no wrong. Now you say, well, what does that have to do with that paragraph? Well, Augur is saying, I don't understand how a woman like that can do that. What application can you make? Well, someone mentioned one time, you possibly can tie it to Proverbs chapter 7, where the adulteress there has paid her vow, and now she feels like she's free to do anything. But I believe what's being said there is this. Augur is saying to the boys, Ithiel, Ucal, you guys don't see yourselves as sinners. And when you look at this gal committing illicit sexual relationships and then getting out of bed and saying, I haven't done a thing wrong, I think even you can see that she's sinning. Why can't you see your own sin? You're sinners like all the rest of us. Wake up. So we put that in the chart now, and you see how the block next to it is dealing with somebody who can't see their sin, and of course the whole row deals with a distorted view of sin. Beautiful. I love it. I wake up at night sometimes and see this. Verses 21 and 23 on the right, they say, again, there's a 3 and 4. For 3 things the earth is disquieted, or shakes or trembles, and for 4 which it cannot or cannot bear up. And what are they? Well, for a servant when he reigneth. You got this servant that's ignorant, undisciplined, and when he gets all kinds of authority like that, he wants what he wants, and no matter what it's going to cost anybody, no matter who it inconveniences, you just can't satisfy him. And then a fool when he's filled with meat. What did we say about a fool in lesson 3? He talks and talks and talks and talks and talks. So after he's eaten now, what else does he have left to do? Talk and talk and talk. And you just can't live with it. And then an odious woman or an unloved woman when she's married. Remember Leah? She pushed as hard as she could to get her husband to love her when he loved Rachel more than her. And it was just hard to live with. But now it says, for which it cannot bear up. You just can't stand it. Remember Sarah and Hagar? That ended up being a battle. And finally Sarah ran Hagar off. You just couldn't live with it. And you say, well, what does that have to do with these boys? It's this. You guys are proud and arrogant. You look down your nose at the rest of people and you expect them to look up to you. Guess what? They can't stand you any more than people can stand any of those 4 things we just talked about. Wake up. You don't have friends. They don't like you. Wake up. So we put that in the chart, and you see how the whole row goes together there as a proud and arrogant spirit. And he's saying, you guys are heading for trouble. It's going to come back and bite you. And then we go to verse 24 to 28, the bottom right block on your right column. And the text says, there be four things which are little upon the earth, but they are exceedingly wise. The ants are people not strong yet, they prepare their meat in the summer. So they have value because they prepare their food, and they have plenty of it through the summer. So there is some value there, okay? And then the conies, that's like a little rabbit, are but a feeble folk, yet they make their houses in the rocks. So they've planned ahead, and they have a way to protect themselves. They're not fierce fighters, so they have some value. Locusts have no king, yet they go out, all of them by bands. And go ahead and try to kill them all. You can't. There are just millions of them. I remember watching a video one time, a guy was flying through a cloud, and what it ended up being was a cloud of millions and millions of locusts. He just splattered his windshield. I don't know how he even landed the thing. But he's saying, go out there and kill all these locusts, or try to. When you get done, there'll be more of them than when you started. And then the spider taketh hold with her hands and is in king's palaces. I like the newer translation. It says the lizard you can take hold of with your hands. And it can camouflage, and that's his protection. But what's Augur saying here? He's saying this. Every one of these displays some wisdom and some value. And these people that you're trying to destroy have some wisdom and some value. Wake up. You're not right in doing this. Recognize their value and quit trying to destroy them. So let's put it in the chart now, and you can see that whole bottom row deals with a critical and destructive spirit. Beautiful structure. I wake up at night sometimes and I see that. But let's look at the conclusion. In verses 29 to 31, there be three things which go well, or stately in their walk. Yea, four are comely in going, or stately in their march. So there's the 3 and 4 again. So as far as three things, there's a lion which is strongest among beasts, and turneth not away for any. Everybody knows the lion is the king of beasts. There's no question about it. He's already demonstrated that. And then a greyhound. It's fascinating to watch them run. They are a sight to behold, and they are stately. Yes, beautiful. And then a he-goat, and actually it's talking about a mountain goat. And you see this goat up on the side of a cliff where we could just barely hang on, and they're not only walking, sometimes they're running and jumping. Fascinating to see. Those are the three things that are stately in their walk. But now there's a fourth that's stately in their march, and it's talking about a king against whom there is no rising. The newer translation said a king when his army's with him. Go up to a king and try to correct him when he has his army backing him up. I don't think so. So what's Augur saying here? Guys, there are things that are stately, rightly called stately. But guess what? You're not one of them. You say how important you are. You say how good you are. You say how deserving you are, but you've done nothing to deserve such praise. All you've done is said what you are. And guess what? People aren't believing it. Okay, now, the last paragraph, verses 32, 33, and it says, if you've done foolishly in lifting up yourself, well, have they? Sure, they're about as proud as guys can get. So if you've done foolishly, and they have, or if you've thought evil, have they? Well, they certainly have. They're out there trying to destroy these people. And he says, if you've done these things, then lay thine hand to thy mouth. Have you ever seen someone and you watch them and they go, what are they saying? Well, they're saying, man, I messed up. I got to fix this. So Augur is saying, in words, put your hand in your mouth. Recognize the fact that you've messed up. And recognize the fact that you got to get it right. Now, he's not done yet, because he's going to say, surely the churning of milk bringeth forth butter, and the wringing of the nose bringeth forth blood, so the forcing of wrath bringeth forth strife. What's he saying? You get out there and you put milk in a churn and you run that stick up and down, and it seems like forever, but at some point it's going to turn to butter. It's a fact. It will happen for certain. And if I walk up to you and I pop you in the nose hard enough, your nose is going to bleed. It's guaranteed. And if you guys keep getting people angry at you, they're going to come back and create all kinds of trouble and heartaches and hurt for you. So this is the chapter. I love it. It's beautiful. But I want to give you a freebie. When I first started studying, I went and talked to Dr. Stuart Custer, tremendously wise man. And I mentioned to him that Augur was the boy's father. And he said, well, I haven't seen that. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, I better back up here a minute. But as the longer I look, the more I'm convinced. And I'm going to show you why I say that. Look on your chart. The whole of row 2 is a distorted view of sin. Row 3 is a proud and arrogant heart. All of row 4 is a destructive and critical spirit. And all of row 1 is a disrespect for parental authority. See, well, what are you getting at? Well, it's this. If I was to share this to Ithiel and Ucal about their father, I would say, your father's stupid. He doesn't know anything. Boy, he doesn't have any knowledge of God. But no, he says, I am stupid. I don't know. Who would say that? Well, the father would say to his own son, I am stupid. So that drives me to really believe that Augur is Ithiel and Ugal's dad. So, freebie, if you agree, great. If not, I wouldn't argue the point with you. But before we leave, I want to ask you, did these boys repent? Well, the text doesn't say. But let me share 2 verses with you. Proverbs 26:12 says, seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There's more hope of a fool than for him. So there's more hope that a fool become wise than that a man wise in his own eyes will become humble. But now let's look at one more verse. Proverbs 27:22. Will you pound a fool in a mortar with a pestle along with crushed grain? Yet his foolishness will not depart from him. So what's it saying? You pound a fool into powder, he's still going to be a fool. There's no hope of correcting him. So now back to our text. If you say there's more hope for a fool than for a man wise in his own eyes, how much hope is that? It's 0 with the ring rubbed out. The only thing that can change a proud man is for the Holy Spirit to convict his heart and to help him see the error of his way. A family member of mine from years ago was a proud man and unapproachable. But the Lord got a hold of his heart, and today he's a gentle, godly man. But the Lord did it. So what can we learn from this chapter? We'll just do a quick application. First, Augur confronted his sons personally about what he saw them doing. He didn't wait for the principal or the pastor or the teacher. He did it himself. And then he explained the heart attitude that drove the undesirable attitudes and actions. This is the reason you're doing it, boys. And then he told them what they needed to see in order to realize the disastrous end of their actions. And finally, he pressed the young men to repent. This is something you can use with your own rebellious children. Too old to spank, but you can help them understand the logic. Before we go, just real quickly, what kind of sinners were these young men? Do you know? Well, watch the Lesson 15 supplement, the next one, and we will look at 1 John chapter 1, verses 5 to 10 to see the 4 types of sinners that there are. And they'll fit into one of those. In fact, you will too, and I hope you see yourself there. Anyway, I hope to see you in the next lesson. We look forward to it. I hope you'll look at that supplement. Thank you.